For being the richest country in the world, the United States has some pretty poor cities scattered around its states. From cities with income 63% lower than the poverty level to cities with more than 200,000 jobs missing, things are getting pretty serious, and especially in Newark. Now, you would think that in a city with the annual median incomes of some neighborhoods adding up to well over $400,000, seriously, that's more zeros than some of us will ever see in our banks, Newark, New Jersey would be one of the richest towns to live in. But think again. With some zip codes or homes to filthy rich residents, more than 25% of the citizens in Newark actually have an income below the poverty limit, 63% lower than the rest of the state. The rich keep getting richer and the poor keep on getting poorer. The gap is a result of problems that have been around for much of the town's history. Social tension and racial unrest date all the way back to riots in 1967, whenever 26 people died during 4 days of rioting. Things aren't looking any better either, because with skyrocketing unemployment and homelessness at its peak, people are reportedly getting out of Newark as quickly as they can, leaving behind those who can't afford to move. And so, the saga continues, and the poor just keep getting poorer. The people in Selma, Alabama say that they're so broke that they can't even pay attention. Selma is well known for its role in the civil rights movement, but there is nothing civil about its economic situation. With a population that just sits in at around 18,000, more than half of those who live in Selma are below the poverty limit. The average income is just a little over $24,000, but the state's average income is $46,500, which is a bit tipped and not in Selma's favor. We've got a tip too. Don't move to Selma, and if you happen to already live there, poor you. A whopping 38% of Selma's residents have incomes that are so low that they have to depend on government resources for the basic needs like food and shelter. It might come as a surprise that Los Angeles, yes, that Los Angeles, California, is one of the poorest cities in the nation. But that same city is also celebrated for being home to some of the richest people and most famous individuals in the world. Plus, it's also home to many homeless people. In fact, there is an entire street dedicated to them. Up to 8,000 displaced LA residents live on the appropriately named street of Skid Row. 1 out of every 5 of those who live in Los Angeles do so in poverty, and over 11% of the population is currently unemployed, and things just seem to get worse as the number is climbing as the job outlook continues to look even bleaker. The cost of living is already outrageous, but it's increasing as well. Poverty and despair in the City of Angels is a living hell for some, but it's nothing new to the area. Skid Row actually originated in the 1930s, and in many ways, the economic situation has been going downhill ever since. LA is a place where well-to-do folks stroll right past the homeless without ever giving them a penny for their thoughts. Ah, Cleveland, Ohio. It keeps making headlines, but not in the good way. The city once claimed as the best city in the nation is now not. In fact, far from it. Almost 33% of those that live in Cleveland are well below the poverty limit, earning a top spot as one of the poorest cities in America. The average household income sits somewhere about $46,000, but considering that the average cost of rent is $700 or more per month, and jobs are hard to find, making even getting an income as nearly as impossible as ever, it's hard to not see why everyone out here is flat broke. Although $3.5 billion has been sunk into the city's efforts to vamp up the downtown area, people are still leaving Cleveland by the droves, and we really can't blame them. There is one thing in the city that's growing though, and that is taxes. The state, county, and city sales tax all total about 8%. Ouch. Rochester, New York is one of the richest cities in the nation, but it also happens to be one of the poorest. The disproportion leaves the city not just unbalanced, but unstable too. The overall property rate is over 31%, with almost half of the children who live there being considered poor. Just like Cleveland, tons of money has been poured into Rochester so as to help it out, but unfortunately, things have not gone for the better. Rochester repetitively gets a failing report card whenever it comes to inclusion. Racism and economic discrimination are a real problem, and the distribution of federal bailout money is a stark reminder of that. A hefty $209 million was allotted for optics, imaging, and photonics, and another $107 million was earmarked for next-gen manufacturing and technology. These jobs are expected to boost the city's prosperity considerably, but only to a select group, which is just a new chapter with the same old story. Boston, Massachusetts is famous for the Boston Tea Party, which took place there in 1773, but the city is anything but a tea party now. Over 21% of the population is actually living in poverty, and Boston is big on higher education, with being home to some of the most prestigious colleges in America, like MIT and Harvard. The fact of the matter is, though, that 28% of college students in Boston are at the poverty level, and that fuels the fact that it might not be the smartest place to attend school here, or, well, really live there for any reason. The cost of living in Boston is 48% above the national average, and while the average income is high too, topping out at $77,000 a year, you're still gonna need to make a lot more dough go in order to be able to afford a house. Honestly, Boston has some of the most expensive rents in the country. Things like utilities, transportation, groceries, and even restaurants are ridiculously overpriced. Sales taxes tip the scale too at 6.25%, which is a bit ironic for a town that's most known for rebelling against high taxes. One of the largest cities in a state known for being rich in oil, but its poverty and homelessness statistics are downright crude. Dallas, Texas' poverty rate is close to 18% and is creeping upward every day. Over 30% of the black population lives in poverty, and the city that is fueled by fuel is ironic that gas prices have become one of the factors driving the city's economic downturn. Notorious for its cowboy roots, Dallas is known for having some of the best beef in the US, especially in Northwest Dallas. The biggest beef is that you'll find some of the most food-deprived individuals living right there amongst the five-star steak restaurants. Poverty in Dallas has been booming since 2000 and has steadily become more of a problem than ever. Unemployment is rising as well and currently sits at 6.7%. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania may be the big cheese when it comes to cream cheese, but it's got a really cheesy history when it comes to being one of the poorest cities in America. Many think that Philadelphia has a pattern of self-destruction when it comes to economics. When deindustrialization had hit in the 1960s and 70s, Philly was hit hard, and rather than re-innovating itself like many other cities did, Philadelphia crumbled and is still 200,000 jobs shy. Minimum wage sits at $7.25 an hour, which is the lowest of all the large U.S. cities. Though attempts have been made to bump it up, the powers that be keep blocking that effort. The cost of living has sliced 10% higher than the rest of the nation, with expensive housing being the biggest problem. Yet, affordable housing continues to be overlooked. New York City. It's called the Big Apple, the city of dreams, and with 8.5 million residents, it is the largest in America. It has the highest number of billionaires in the entire world and does have its fair share of poor people too. The cost of living is enormous in New York City, so comparing apples to apples, the national average annual income sits at just $80,000, and that doesn't go very far in New York City, where an average apartment costs you $3,000 a month for one bedroom. Being from New York City, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was no stranger to poverty. He no doubt had it in the back of his mind when he presented the New Deal aimed at helping the poor. But 75 years later, the Big Apple is still rotten through and through, with more homelessness and poverty-stricken people than ever. Oh, and to top it all off, 12.9% are food deprived in the city, named after food itself, which is bound to leave a bad taste in anybody's mouth. Detroit, Michigan had earned the nickname Motor City decades ago when it had become the birthplace of the modern automobile. In the 1950s and 60s, Detroit was the richest city in the US, but the brakes were slammed on that in the 2000s when 48% of the population lost their jobs. Detroit was actually the first American city to ever file for bankruptcy. The average household income sits under just $28,000, and with the unemployment rate close to 20%, some have no income at all. Of all the children living in Detroit, a sad 60% live in poverty, and 50% of the population is functionally illiterate. Ever since Motor City's history was broken up and jobs are now scarce, the whole town is flat broke, literally.